right, everybody, welcome to the Gilder Spotlight podcast. Today, I'm super excited for our guest. His name is Joh Olson. Joe, I'd love for you to kind of give our audience a quick background of yourself, and how you kind of got into, the medical field and just entrepreneurship in general.
Thanks, Tega. Really glad to be here. Probably the easiest place to start, you may not be expecting this, is with Mr. Rogers. So you probably know the TV show and maybe a little bit about him, but some really interesting work that Mr. Rogers did, which is bringing people together and also helping our culture move forward. So one of the things that he says in the show is look for the helpers. So I think my background in healthcare really starts with that, this idea of being a helper. Um, my mom is a nurse. I have lots of doctors and nurses in our family. And so without getting into too many details, a little bit of a winding path. Started out, had a mentor who was a neurosurgeon, so really started out on that path, and then spent some time in the working with another surgeon who was a friend of the family, and realized, sort of lifestyle and sort of the relationships that unfortunately doctors don't get to have because of their commitment to work. I saw the nurses and their work and their balance of being able to contribute and help, but not having the same draw on their time, sort of 24/7 work as intense as doctors have in many of their practices. I later realized there's lots of different practices, and maybe I should have become a like an optician or something or an ophthalmologist.
Right.
Um, but at that point in my life, it came to nursing, and so I sort of switched. Luckily, I had all the prereqs because a lot of the things for being trained for being a doctor are similar to being a nurse, and so started out in nursing. I was lucky enough to get into what they used to have training programs for new nurses at the place that you work. Now, a lot of times it's like you come to work as a new nurse and you sort of figure it out on the job with the other nurses. But there used to be formal training programs. So I was lucky enough to be in a couple of years of training in at UCLA after I had my formal nursing training or my academic nursing training, and shout out to all the nurses and doctors and even educators who have helped me along the way, but in particular at UCLA where things kicked off. And the work that I found there was in particular working with children and beginning my leadership path in the operating room. And so at that time, I focused on orthopedics and pediatrics. That was before UCLA's Mattel Hospital. Now there's a full built out hospital for children. I helped with a little bit of that project, but that was sort of being set up as I transitioned out. But I that was also the beginning of another theme in my healthcare career, which is like these big hospital build projects. So some themes started to develop early on: leadership, working in the operating room, and these big hospital builds. And that you'll see those as themes that continued throughout my career as well.
That's fantastic. And just to kind of go back to your adolescence, and you're watching Mr. Rogers as kind of like a role model to help out others. And I know that you also had some mentors that were doctors, but how did having, that role model of Mr. Rogers and also those mentors, those multiple mentors in neuroscience, how did that shape kind of the start of your career? Like, why did you want to kind of follow the path of doing right when no one's looking and making sure that you want to help out others in the medical field, specifically in neuroscience? How did Dr. Rogers and those mentors kind of help pave that path?
Thanks. Great, wonderful question. It's such a positive thing to reflect on. I appreciate the opportunity for that. The Some of the things that come to mind initially are the idea of, one, like if you go back to Mr. Rogers all the way, like leaning into things that are uncomfortable. If you look at
Hmm.
some of the nuances of his work, he was really working to bring us together in ways that probably weren't very comfortable, and I know he had to sort of go. I think it was PBS who he was with as far as the station, and I think he had to like go and fight to have things as simple as like maybe people with certain jobs that weren't seen as like elevated, people, cross cultural, the way that stories were told on that story. So I think initially one of the things that he was doing is one, awareness of things that are happening more in our, sort of pop culture. And you have to remember, this is a time when people would like all across America and even the world would tune into a show when it was on and then talk about it. So very different than now where it's like everybody's sort of popping off and watching their own thing. Maybe, a lot of people are watching Dune now, at least in the Bay Area, but there's
Right,
very few
right.
things that like everybody's sort of doing and then comparing notes on. But back then, luminaries like him, although it was a children's show, like I remember in our family, like my mom and even grandparents, we'd all be watching it together and then we would talk about it. And I think if you translate that to more recent times and then some of my other mentors that have helped me along the way, they were also tuned into like things that were happening in the team, in the group, in the larger hospital environments, even sometimes like if you look at Stanford, UC Davis, UCLA, like macroeconomics, worldwide trends. Like one of my mentors at UCLA, one of the things that we did there was we had an immigration program. This was in the like late 90s. So most of the immigration program was like bringing nurses in from the Philippines, helping train them. They have amazing training there already, but then sort of training them on like, how we did things locally and then bringing them just into the new sort of milieu of working at UCLA. Huge program, attorneys, all these things. But where the rubber hit the road was in our operating room. And so if you think about that acceptance, that bringing new people into a group, that those are some things that I learned as a nascent early leader where these mentors were able to, they're just like very open to that idea, right? So if you sort of connect Mr. Rogers and sort of cross-cultural things and you take it down to UCLA, this idea that was like, oh, these are amazing nurses. They may not have like grown up in LA, but they're going to come here and contribute and help us do great work and probably even elevate the work in some cases. That particular theme of the idea that like anyone from anywhere can help us on our mission has also like been a theme for me, like in our e-commerce businesses that we have people from all over the world working for us. And that theme was implanted at UCLA, thinking about where are there other people in the world who can come and contribute to our mission and help us with patient care. So it goes all the way back to that. I'll mention one other mentor briefly. I won't mention her by name, but this is when I was the administrator at Mount Desert Island Hospital in Bar Harbor, Maine. I had come from UCLA. I had literally the policy book of UCLA with me. I think it was on maybe paper and a floppy drive, if I remember right, something like that. And I came to this much smaller hospital. We're talking like UCLA, more than 25 operating rooms, cardiac surgery, neurosurgery, that kind of level of thing. And then you get out to Bar Harbor, Maine, where it's like, hey, we sort of stabilize patients and then we get them to the next city, which is also not very big. So just very different environments, two operating rooms in Bar Harbor. And I thought, I'm smart. I put in the work and I have this policy book. So I'm just gonna, sort of run my routine. And a mentor there, she'd literally been born in that hospital like 75 or 80 years before, and knew everyone really well. She took me aside and she said, you really have two choices. Like you can keep doing what you're doing. You can burn bridges with our team. You can be here a year, maybe make a little bit of a difference, or you can represent us as a team to the administration of the hospital, to the board, and help us with things that we know need to get done, engage with us. You can make a huge impact here and you can be here longer, which was something I did want. I ended up being there for 5 years and being a really embedded part of that community. But what that was really sort of the beginning of my understanding of servant leadership and how to step down sort of off of the sort of ivory tower version where it's like I know everything, I've got the data, I've seen all this working somewhere else, we should just do the same thing here. And really getting to like what is this team, what is this team member, what do our patients and clients need. That was really the beginning of her helping me understand that. And there's been a lifelong study. If you see some of the writing that I do and things like that, there's a lot of work that I love to work on servant leadership, partially because I believe that concept is is sort of misrepresented. I think the word servant is really loaded, especially in our culture. And so I love to
Right.
bring pieces of servant leadership forward because it's such an important model for leadership, serving each team member, serving the team as a whole, serving our clients and thinking that way, like what do they really need? How can I bring value to them? But that's the sort of inception story of where I started to study and sort of be a lifelong student of servant leadership.
That's amazing. And also just one more question too, like for you, I think there's a lot of people that have egos that feel like they know everything, kind of like as you mentioned, like a lot of people have to step down from kind of like being on that pedestal and understanding how to learn and dive. What does being a lifelong learner mean to you?
Great question. One is just student mindset. Anytime when you think, oh, I've got a handle on something, I mean, there's things I've been studying, probably you've been studying almost really my whole life. You think, oh, well, maybe I'm starting to become an expert at this.
All right.
But if you look at student mindset and for Buddhism more broadly, there's this idea that anything we're coming to is we're sort of new to it today. We're a new person today. The milieu, the world around us is new today. The whole idea that you sort of can't step into the same river twice. So I think no matter how much it's almost like the more you study something, the more you realize there's more there to understand. And it's like, sort of physics. You just you get smaller, 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 and you realize there's just like, there's whole
Right.
worlds. It's just like we can study it as we get the technology to study it more closely. I love this sort of connection between the physical world and what we understand about ourselves as people and as leaders. There's just so many nuances you can never understand all of it, and the more you sort of peel back the onion, there's like another onion in there. Oh, it's like, oh, it's
Right,
a whole
right.
onion field in here, right? And so it's I think that approach to life has helped me. I would almost like reflect on growth as a human and as a man, and as from a young man to a person who really cares about mostly helping others and knows that I don't have all the answers. At some point I made that transition, and probably every day I'm making it in some part of my life. But being able to think through the thought of just, what don't I know about this? What does that person know that I
Sorry, I
don't
lost
know?
you here, Joe. You still there?
I
Sorry,
am,
I
yeah,
know
but
I
I
lost
could
you
see
here
that
for a
you
second.
locked
Okay.
up, so I don't know if the software got it,
Yeah.
but that was the end of it anyhow. So I
Oh
just,
yeah.
yeah, it's
Okay,
enough for now.
definitely. It records locally, so it definitely gets it. I do have like a slight, I think there's a slight delay, but
Okay.
we're all good. I can edit this part out too. But yeah, just going back to kind of the start of your career. I know that you wanted to get in medical, but here I also see that you went to the Wharton School of Business as well, and I know that's probably more midway through your career.
It is, yeah.
When did you decide to transition from being in medical to kind of understanding the medical world and also the business world, kind of both sides?
Yeah, there's a story here. So the story for
Okay.
this one is, yeah, and it's just a series of stories, but I'll tell just the one that's sort of the pinnacle. One thing that's interesting in healthcare is you could almost think about it somewhat as a pirate ship, like it's a ship, it's on the sea, but every sort of unit is localized and sort of doing their own thing, and every place that you work is a little bit different as well. So I've a lot of times in healthcare I sort of thought of my team as like, yes, I have some leadership capability, but like if you look around the room, it's like the world's best cardiac surgery nurse, and sitting next to her is the world's best cardiac surgeon. And so leadership
All
of
right,
that
right.
environment is tricky because I might be the best administrator in the room. I might understand the budget the most, but I'm certainly not the world's best cardiac surgeon, right? And so it's a very interesting type of leadership where you're almost like in charge of almost nothing, but you are trying to influence things and you are trying to help teams move forward. Again, serving the team, serving the patient. And the story that happened here was I was doing a budget. I won't say where, but operating rooms and perioperative services and procedural services oftentimes are lumped up together. Sometimes they have radiology with them. And if you just go from like a lives touched or a dollars of revenue perspective, these are billion-dollar plus enterprises. Like the operating rooms that I've run around the United States, oftentimes top line was billion plus dollars. And then you break it down into different service lines, things like that. I was a nurse. I'd had my bachelor's degree at this point when this story's happening. I was balancing this billion-dollar budget, which you have to do every year. You actually have to do it like every month and then every quarter and every year. But this was sort of the big wrap roll up. And the finance team was it was like going to come to our part of the hospital to do the big meeting about it. And there was I expected the controller for our area plus an analyst to come and have a meeting and set up for the big meeting, which had like the sometimes board members and the CFO in it. And they came down to my office and we looked over the spreadsheet, or multiple, it's sort of spreadsheet with multiple tabs, and very complex financial setup and includes different payer mixes and things like that. And the analyst just sort of popped through and looked at it and was like, yeah, like this looks great. Literally like a 3-minute meeting. And I was just like, it is impossible that this is great. Like I'm a nurse. Like I'm just trained as a clinician. You're relatively junior. Like you're an analyst. This is about ready to go to like the CFO and the board of like a multi-billion dollar, institution that serves people from all over the world and has, all sorts of interesting financial considerations, including bonds and things like that are very complex. Um, it hit me that there's no way for me to do my job with the training that I had at the level that I was being asked to do it, right? These are world-class institutions, and the departments I had are some of the biggest revenue generators in those institutions. And so a few things transpired. One was so Wharton has a healthcare leadership program is what I took there. So it's substantially an MBA, but it's very focused on healthcare leadership, team dynamics, similar things that you see in my coaching now. Very well regarded instructors. Adam Grant was one of our instructors, which at the time he was, just like sort of a budding Wharton professor. Now, just a huge voice in the world of how we can improve ourselves. Stu Friedman, also at Wharton, others. Those are just the ones that pop now because they're still in my work as a coach. But at the time, they were helping us as healthcare leaders. Right. So there's a group of us that were high potential leaders from the University of California. I applied to that, was really blessed to be accepted. And then meanwhile, I also got a more formal degree from UC Davis as well, which is like a formal MBA. That was like a leadership program in their MBA program. And then I also there's a similar program for healthcare leaders at Stanford that I participated in, and it's like a certificate program. So I think from that sort of moment on of the story that I told you, it was like, how do I invest in and develop myself as a leader? Because I'm basically being asked to operate at this level and lead at this level. And so I just really started investing in that. And ever since then, I don't know what my budget is in investing in my knowledge as a leader and getting certified in different coaching methodologies, things like that. But it's in the tens of thousands every year of investing, continuing to invest in understanding what we know as sort of a human race and as Americans, as leaders. And then that's what I help to pass on to my to Gilder people who are members of Gilder. I do that just as a mentor here, but then in my coaching practice, that's what I do too, as I stay on the forefront. I'm a fellow in a Harvard affiliate program, the IOC. So I'm just always investing in this, but that's sort of the moment when it started.
For those that, because we have a lot of entrepreneurs that listen to this, and a lot of them are really tight on a budget. Do you think that what do you think is a good start for personal development? Like where do you think people could go? What do you think a good budget is per month if you're obviously tight? I know, and also, do you think that $10,000 a year, is that a great return? Is that a good ROI on yourself? I know those are kind of like three different questions, but like
Yeah,
just for those that are low on a budget, where do you think they can start as far as personal development?
I think peer groups generally are the best value. I know this sounds like it's sort of an ad for Gilder, but it's just that's true. And if you look at my life and my wife and I together, many of these peer groups 10,000 becomes sort of like a very small budget when you look at some of the peer groups that are out there. And I think they begin to serve people who have become more and more successful, both financially and how they contribute value to the world. So, I mean, some of these peer groups are hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, and people feel like they're great value. Bringing it back down to the level that you're talking about, people who are just beginning and just starting out, groups, Gilder specifically, I think is a great value. Just seeing what's happening in the Slack channel, knowing the value that I've contributed just as a mentor who wants to see people being successful. But there's a whole world of peer groups, development, sort of like some versions of these are very, they sort of come in and they want equity. That's one thing I would mention around your sort of pricing is those peer groups seem great because they're almost like sort of free early on, right? But equity can be one of the more expensive ways to sort of pay to participate. So just be thoughtful about sort of real costs and also in time. Sometimes you get into some of these sort of accelerators and things like that, and only sort of 10% of what they're doing is valuable to you, but you end up spending, many hours every week when you should have been grinding away at your business, but it feels good sometimes to participate. So I'd say two things I would bring in to sort of focus here is the cost financially, that's important, but time is probably even more important. And then equity is another thing that I see people sometimes maybe giving up a little more freely to some of these programs, but it becomes really expensive later, assuming success. So just some things to think about there. I would mention also that I've seen some people benefit if you have sort of a facilitation bent or an administrative bent and you're willing to put time into getting people together and doing, just even meals or, hey, let's get a lunchtime Zoom chat going. I've seen people benefit greatly just from sort of self-administering and bringing their own community together. So don't hesitate to either participate in something like that or even set it up yourself.
Absolutely. And for those of us who are listening, yeah, Gilder, we do offer all those things. We don't want this to be an ad for Gilder, but 100% I definitely love what you're
That's what,
saying.
I mean, I wouldn't be
And
here
just to
as a
go,
mentor if I didn't think it was a really great thing that you guys are doing for founders. So that's why I'm here because I've
uh,
actually looked at lots of different groups like this, and I think it's like getting to be even more and more valuable every day. So yeah, again, not an ad, but it's just
I
cool
love it.
and
I appreciate the kind
objectively,
sentiment.
yeah.
Thank you so much. Just to go back on your experience. So, I know that you ended up going to Stanford University School of Medicine. Um, you ended up working there for a while. What was kind of like the difference between starting your career in UCLA and then kind of transitioning from multiple different hospitals and different orgs, and then suddenly you're at Stanford? Like, what was kind of like that, kind of that path like?
Yeah. Lots to talk about there. One sort of concept I would mention
Yeah.
is it's actually harder to work in Stanford healthcare statistically than it is to get into Stanford. So, if I don't
Wow.
know
And
the
Stanford's the
exact
hardest university to get into in the world.
exactly. So it's
It's
just a
the hardest
fascinating
university to get
fact
into.
that like if you want to be a nurse at Stanford and you apply, there'll be 300 other nurses that also applied and you'll be selected. If you want to get into like the
So
MBA program at Stanford,
how
there'll be
did,
like, the similar
mhm.
ratios, but actually harder statistically to become a team member at the hospital than or in the health
Wow.
center generally than it is
What
to actually
what was
become a
your
student.
process like to get in?
I was recruited in. It was a little bit different. So I was in a leadership role. I was at UC Davis. One of the doctors that I worked with at UC Davis, we had done a big hospital build. We built out the Children's Hospital and Surgery Center at Davis. One of our anesthesia doctors also worked at Stanford, and then he sort of more of his time was going to be spent at Stanford. So I was actually recruited in, which is a whole sort of different ball of wax. I just had to take a lot of meetings and meet a lot of teams and again it was a leadership role, so in that case I had to meet some board members and things like that. So I think very different experience for me probably than let's say a nurse who wanted to work at Stanford. Part of my role was helping to screen that. we would look for we would look for things like very specific sets of skills related to what we needed, and sometimes we would need like two sets of skills. Like if you think about an operating room nurse that usually works in orthopedics, we might need someone who worked in orthopedics but had a little bit of enough knowledge in neurosurgery they could cover that type of operating room procedure setup as well. Maybe the more simple things in the secondary skill set. And so oftentimes we'd be looking for these like an operating room nurse, which there's already not very many of, who is focused on the most complex orthopedic surgery in the world, and then also can do neurosurgery, right? So sometimes the people we were looking for, there's only one or two of them in the world anyhow, and so we might even use recruiters, etc. So sometimes it was us going the other way to try to find just like a sort of unicorn talent person, and then other times when it was more generalized positions, we'd be looking for people with a lot of experience. Sometimes we'd be like, well, we want to see that they're already local. They're just transferring to us from a local hospital. So again, because for some of the less sort of hairy sets of skills, then we would start to really look for people who we knew would fit the culture and stay with us and fit the team as well. So those are some insights into sort of what it takes to work at an institution like that, especially in places as specialized as like sub teams within the operating room. And then I would be remiss if I didn't mention that honestly it's actually the managers and sometimes even the teams that end up making the final decisions, and that's part of the culture, not just at Stanford but also most of the major academic institutions that I've worked at, is that it's not just an administrative function. This is we actually end up relying heavily on the team for those decisions because they know a lot and probably best about fit within their team.
And kind of just piggyback back off that, what do you think has changed in the medical industry since you started your career to now?
This one is a little is I'll reflect on something that's maybe less popular to talk about and definitely sad. But I mean what I
Mm.
see now in the medical industry is just burnout, just rampant burnout. And it has
Mm.
to do with
Hmm.
COVID. It has to do with mechanisms I don't completely understand, but the status of sort of medical professionals in our society has is reduced for some reason. And one of the things that you see there is people's frustration with our sort of health system generally ends up now being taken out on like their doctor, their nurse, whoever's there at the CNA at the bedside. Um, and so I see that the tensions have risen and the sort of resources are less. I see places like Stanford and
Is
others that
it?
use programs called Heart Math and others to like help
Mhm.
provide support. I think now Calm app is like pretty people get it now as a benefit because we need it. So
Right,
I
right.
think there's this the stress is really up and the resources are down, although I think the administration is trying to solve for that. And then costs are obviously up, so we see hospitals, not so much the UCSFs, UC Davis, Stanfords of the world, but healthcare generally. We see they're trying to staff with like one less nurse, or they're trying to maybe bring in robotics or someone from another place who's sort of being able to monitor your patient using a device, things like that. I think those concepts are meant to help, but oftentimes what they're doing is they're putting more on the bedside team while seeming like they're solving, but it's just sort of more and more. And then if you look at documentation specifically, the EHRs are just there's more and more time that bedside care providers have to put into documentation, partially so they can get reimbursed. Um, Unfortunately, I would reflect on many of my clients who are sort of still in this space. They're usually entrepreneurs, but they have some connection still to academic medicine. Probably generally like a practice there, and then something entrepreneurial they're doing. That's substantially what my clients look like. I see just people are really aching to sort of get out of that environment and ramp up their whatever their sort of historical
Right,
side
right.
hustle is. They come to me and they say I need this to become my main thing because I can't last anymore in this environment. I see a lot of that, and I think it's
Have,
a somewhat of a bias because
mhm.
they're coming to me because they need help. But from what I see, even with people who aren't my clients or more friends, colleagues, I see this stress level continuing to rise, unfortunately.
Right. No, I definitely can echo that. I mean, I come from I mean, my cousin, she's a nurse. My my stepmom, she runs a chiropractic operation, and my dad also helps out run that. And then even like my aunt's a massage therapist, kind of in medical therapy. And so I do definitely see like there's a lot of stress involved. People, I mean, sometimes their patients can't afford to pay, etc. It's difficult. Are there any startups that you've noticed in the medical space, or any type of, um, anyone in the medical space utilizing AI to make their job more efficient or more effective, with less time?
Yeah, a few comments about AI. One is this is like for those of us who have been in healthcare for a while, this is at least it's like the fourth major wave of AI. I think the promise this time feels
Nice.
like it's sort of finally going to unlock some value. But I would
Right, right.
reflect on the fact that many of us have seen this sort of routine a few times now, and
Hmm.
each time it's actually led to sort of more work and not less. So I'll just make that caveat that I haven't drank the Kool-Aid fully, but I will talk about a place where I have drank the Kool-Aid fully, um, which is so there's a set of startups which have to do with some of the things I was reflecting on a moment ago, the big data in healthcare. So huge amounts of data in healthcare, second only maybe to like physics and the study of like stars and things like that.
Right, right.
Huge data sets, and relatively complex data sets. And there is a lot of great work, I think, with machine learning and AI in that area that is already happening. Like it's not like the promise of this, and it's not, I think we're like, oh, we'd love to have just like a video and everything we say to the patient gets recorded and then it just gets billed. And then like, I just get back to patient care. Like I can't drink the Kool-Aid on that. Unfortunately, it's like probably as far away or further than self-driving, unfortunately. So just somewhere in the future, right? Where we're making great strides and huge impact already is in what's called clinical data abstraction. So data goes into the medical record, but it needs to come out in a lot of different places, right? It needs to come out for billing, needs to come out for studies, needs to come out to understand efficacy and what worked even really recently. So we're starting to get to a place. I think I would make an ad, like this is an ad for Carta Healthcare. So I was the COO
Yeah.
of Carta Healthcare for 3 years. They just relatively recently raised their B round, and they are making huge impact in their customers' lives. So the old way is I'm a nurse and I need to be a pretty well versed nurse. We're talking 10, 20 years of experience, because I need to be able to look over here in the medical record and sort of extrapolate, like, oh, if this data is here and that data is there, this other thing must be true. So it needs to be an experienced nurse who does this work, go through the medical record, and then answer these questions over here in these other data sets. And in particular, clinical data. Um, I think the way I would think about these is like studies that are being done on particular patient sets that are sort of very long term studies. Um, that version of what we used to call just like swivel nursing, which is like, oh, over here
Yeah.
medical record, over here the other thing, and you're just typing all day, right? People don't know about this. There's teams of these people that either their whole job is to do this or part of their job in concert with their clinical duties is to do this. Like I had a team like this at Stanford and everywhere else that I've worked, where they had to take this data and put it other places. Software can do that. This is a place where machine learning is just perfectly suited to scrape the medical record and then answer questions over here. And what we see is not then that it's done, but then that those seasoned nurses can be 10 times more effective, because now what they're doing is they're checking the machine learning form filling versus having to do all this like data transferring.
Manual
So
data entry
it
and data.
works.
Yeah.
Like it's real.
Wow.
I mean, I it was my meeting before this where I'm still an advisor with them.
Yeah.
Their clients are super happy. They're getting more clients. So that's a cool place where machine learning is just like punching through something that I think later we're going to be like, humans did this? Like nurses did this?
Hmm. Do you-
Nurses who could have been at the bedside were
right,
doing this
right.
data transfer work. So I think there's probably
Right,
many
right.
great examples, but that's one that I'm close to.
I love that example because I also think that I mean, I mean, if you utilize something like Carta Health, it can take, it can save, a medical institution like, 2 or 3 full-time annual hires. right? And those 2 or 3 full-time annual hires can actually go ahead and do other stuff and be more
They get to the
productive.
bedside, which is like where
Um,
we actually need
yeah, exactly.
nurses,
Being
right?
right. And to kind of go off that, is there a do you think in the future, because right now I mean I know medical is, especially the price of medical in the United States is crazy. Do you think that the utilization of AI will eventually help make medical care more affordable in the States and also just around the world in general? I know a lot of countries do have free medical care with, through their government.
I'm hopeful.
But do you think
Yeah,
it'll
I'm a
help?
person who
Do you think it'll help reduce kind of like the costs?
that's not what we've seen historically with sort of software solutions in
Okay.
healthcare. So I'll again sort of make that caveat, just
Mhm.
so all the other healthcare people know I'm
Yeah.
not I've been around a little, just like they have, and probably carry the same
Hmm.
concerns that they do. I would. I think it's probably going to be one of these things where it comes sort of slow, and we see it breaking through in areas like we're talking about, and then one day we're like, oh, like that worked, that helped. These things are better, but I don't know that it's in our lifetimes that we're going to see like, oh, AI solved all these problems and now nurses and doctors and other healthcare, bedside practitioners found all this efficiency from it. I think we are seeing things like what I mentioned with Carta Healthcare. There's some really cool studies right now in China where they're able to do things like the machine learning. Their elder care centers there are huge. We're talking tens of thousands of people, and what substantially seems like a big hotel. And the caregivers are there as well, so it's like a kind of hospital for elderly people. They're able to do huge studies there because they have so many people and more, it's not as fragmented as here. So we're seeing some promising things with machine learning and video from those studies, which are things like what are predictors of people not being able to care for themselves anymore and needing more care, and then being able to pick up on that on video before someone, let's say, falls and injures themselves. So I would say yes, it's promising. I would also just say like it doesn't look to me like it has the momentum and the sort of utility early days that we're going to see a big wave of like all of a sudden things are much cheaper in the next 10 to 30 years. But we don't know how fast some of these things are going to break through. So it's hard to guess, but I can't see that yet.
Right. No, I mean, I like how there's still, consistent improvements in utilization of technologies, and there's so many different startups that are involved in healthcare, medical. Um, and just to go off of that, when did you change from being kind of, working in healthcare, also doing a lot of different, Carta Health, like being on like, the C-suite, the COO. When did you switch from kind of working a lot to being more of like a coach, a consultant, an advisor? And why'd you make that switch?
Lots of we had to do two podcasts probably, but I'll try to give the
I
shortest
know,
version of the
yeah,
story. The shortest
yeah,
version is one is one of our businesses started to grow rapidly, and it had great margins, and so that was what pulled me out of healthcare administration. Is I basically needed to work on our businesses. My wife and I are partners. When I say us, it's me and her, and we have a portfolio of businesses. They range from e-commerce, hospitality, commercial, residential real estate, service business, and my coaching business, and others, but those are the main ones. And so we have this portfolio of businesses, but the sort of transition that you're mentioning really happened when one of our e-commerce businesses it became very popular with customers. We had great return on ad spend, and we were able to grow it very quickly. So that's the answer. And then we had a son as well. So my wife had been doing that on her
got it.
own, and I'd been sort of 60 hours a week, leaving in the literally like in the dark and getting home in the
Hmm.
dark. Um, to like we have a family now, and so sort of
Hmm.
choosing entrepreneurship where you have a little bit more control of your schedule theoretically, and being present for our now
Right.
two boys. So those are some of the answers. And then I think the transition to coaching, two parts. One is we had sold a company and I was sort of in between things and talking to coach that I have actually through Tiger 21, which I'm now a chair of, and really a facilitator and coach in that group as well. So that was one of the early things. I was also starting this practice with healthcare entrepreneurs, given that I'd had that experience. So the two coaching things sort of came together, and Tiger 21 provides amazing training to us as chairs of the groups. It's a whole other thing we could dive into later, but I'll finish this story. Um, and then I was seeking my own training about I'd learned all these things. People were coming to me naturally, like I'm a Stanford anesthesiologist and I have a sleep center and I want to have three sleep centers and you're an entrepreneur. How do I scale this thing up? I sort of just developed a word of mouth, like a person who'd been successful transitioning out of healthcare and becoming an entrepreneur. And it just like this force was all the people that I knew were sending people to me.
Right.
And that, so my practice grew relatively quickly, relatively early. And then the Tiger 21 work sort of like threaded in with that. And it just, I guess I would almost put it in the realm of like a calling. It was like I didn't really set up to be like, I'm going to go do this now. People started asking me for that kind of help. And I started doing more and more of it. And I started realizing these were like real problems that people were having. Some of the like friends that I had were getting really bad coaching. Like they were getting coached to do things that weren't sort of logical. And so I, in a way, I also wanted to help
Right. Right.
people avoid that problem, you know? And so it came quite naturally. And I would just slot it right under people needed help. I was helping and I could see the outcomes. I could
Hmm.
see that it was like we were working together and people were just doing amazing things that they'd been stuck with before. And that just, I'm super activated by that, as you can probably tell by my energy right now. It's like
Right. Right.
I loved healthcare because patients would come in the operating room, you know, classic example, broken tib fib kid, and they're just
Hmm.
screaming, you know, in pain. And then like a couple hours later, after all this care, it's like almost normal. You know, they have a cast, they're not in pain anymore, and they're
Right.
like they want to just go be a kid again, you know? And I can see some of that in my coaching clients now where you know they come and they're just in pain, like they don't, their business system is not set up well, and in particular a lot of times particularly healthcare people struggle with delegation. So it's like figure out what you're actually good at, get a team around you who solves for all the other stuff, and then you have this freedom as an entrepreneur. It sounds simple, but that it really does work that way. And so that now is making me really happy to be able to help people that way.
Yeah, I couldn't echo more because I think you're definitely one of the most positive people that I've met, interacted with, and I think having your kind of energy, coaching people, helping them walk through these difficult, problems in business or medical, it's amazing. So I couldn't echo more how that kind of just naturally came to be. Um,
That's a
one last
huge
quick
compliment.
question.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, and even just talking to you, I just get just good energies, good feelings. I get, some of the stories that you're telling me, I'm getting like goosebumps just from hearing it. But just one question, just about you do so many different things. How do you manage your schedule?
I just told you. It's all delegation and team.
It's all
So
delegation team. Okay.
absolutely. So I have, you know,
Yeah.
across our portfolio, there's operators in some of the businesses. My wife herself is an
Hmm.
amazing operator. I probably have to credit her first because, like, this morning I had to work with a client and we had some difficulty with one of
Hmm.
my kids getting where they needed to be. And my
Right,
wife did
right,
it. And she's like running restaurants and e commerce companies herself. So, probably number one, I have to give credit
right.
to my wife. And then the broader team from there, right? So I have right now in
Hmm.
Remarkable Freedom as it's scaling up, I have an executive assistant who's really sort of transitioning towards chief of staff for that work.
Hmm.
Everything that I do, I have this like who not how thing, right? It's like I'm almost, if there's work that's coming to me and I need to get it done, I know it's going to take like 2 weeks to actually get it done. Like some of the writing I need to do, things like that. You know, my Maha is her name. She'll be like, "Let me just put that onto your calendar, and I'll do it with you, so it actually gets
Right,
done."
right.
So it is true when things come onto my plate. It's actually quite difficult to find time to do them, but I do, partially because of her help and others on various teams that we have. But if you look across our whole portfolio, you know, it's hundreds of people that are helping us get all these things done and taking ownership of different parts of these things. And similar to what you were just reflecting on, like my job is to just like unblock stuff, right? A lot of times it's like, I use this tool, it's critical, and for some reason the credit card isn't working. You need to just log in and like pay for that again,
Right,
right?
right.
I'll drop everything to do that because I know you're blocked. And that's an example of like
Hmm.
everything that I think my job is, back to servant leadership, is just literally hundreds of people that are helping move all these things forward all over the world. If they're blocked for some reason, my number one job is to get them unblocked and to make sure their work is flowing and they know what, what sort of the vision looks like and where we're headed together. So in a way, I do a lot of meeting and talking to people and helping them unlock and push forward. So similar coaching work is just some is in our holding company and others is for my clients, but it's actually a lot of the work is very similar.
Yeah, no, it just seems like you can fit a lot in your schedule with having kids, multiple businesses, being an advisor for so many things, being a coach. I also know that, the other year you were, ski patrol. So it's just amazing that you have the stamina and the energy to fit, everything in and probably do 70 hour weeks consistently. And that's no small feat. So it's amazing. Joe, I really enjoyed this conversation. And I really would actually love to have you on it. Speaking of that as a second time, because I know there's a lot more that we can kind of dive into. But are
Sure,
there
I'd love
any
to.
kind of final thoughts that you have?
The, we talked about time, so I'd love to just
Hmm.
remind especially early entrepreneurs that time is the most valuable thing that you have. Tiger 21, the group that I was mentioning earlier, these are ultra high net worth individuals, and my wife and I have found our own version of success in business as well. The thing that you see when people solve for finances is they start buying time. And I think it's fascinating to see young people sort of maybe not invest their time the same way when they're on their sort of path to success. I would just put that out there that one of the major realizations in my life has been that like time is the real bank, and how you use that to create value sort of fills up the other bank. And then once you fill up that bank, you start really clawing back your time as much as you can. So I think the people who I see that are most successful are clear on what they're working to accomplish, how they're serving others, and how they're applying their time to that. So I almost, Remarkable Freedom, my coaching brand, I almost named it various things that have to do with time because I care so much about this. But the core realization I came to is that freedom is using your time in the way that you enjoy adding value. That's what real freedom is. And so I came to the freedom concept being more important than the time concept. It's like the higher level concept. But it really is about time in the end.
Couldn't agree more with your final sentiment. I mean, even me, I find myself being like, I can just do this myself, and it'll take like 4 or 5 hours. But then, I talked to Brian and Michael, and they're like, we can spend like $50 and just have someone else do that, and that'll
And
save
often
you five
often really
five or six
well.
hours. And
Right.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
find the person who's
exactly.
dedicated their life to putting graphics into PDFs and being the world
Right,
class
right,
expert
right.
in that, and pay them $50 for something that's elevated versus spending 5 hours of your own time, and you would have been better served, and your community would have been better served by you really
Hmm.
working in your superpowers.
Exactly. Joe, I really appreciate your time. And yeah, lots of different things I want to talk to you more about. Potentially in the next episode with you. But
Sounds good.
thank you so much, and yeah, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, let's get out onto the slope sometime.
Let's do it. Let's do
All
it.
right.
Cheers.
Thanks.